I woke the next morning scarcely knowing where I was, but when I saw the sun shining full in the window, turning the yellow curtains white with its brilliance, I jumped out of bed, washed and dressed, afraid that my uncle would think me the laziest creature alive. As I brushed my hair, I happened to look out the window to see Mrs. Hastings in the garden below, bending over some plants that were just showing themselves above ground. I clattered eagerly down the stairs and out the back door. "I'm sorry I slept so long," I apologized. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Mrs. Hastings pushed back her gray curls and turned to smile at me. "Come look," she said. "My peas are shooting up already." "But they're green," I said, which was all too obvious. "I thought—" "Oh, I cook them in a pot outdoors and we eat them in the garden," the cook said, pointing to a wrought iron table and chairs under the beech tree. "In summer, this is where we have our salads." And then, changing the subject, she took my arm and led me back to the house, where she made a most splendid breakfast. "What are my duties here?" I asked as I took more cream for my tea. "Uncle said I was to ask you." "Keep an old woman company, mostly," she answered. "We do have a gardener who helps out now and then, but you can weed when you like. Help out in the kitchen when needed, tidy up the rooms. In truth, my dear, there's not all that much for you to do, but if you wish, Helene's hat shop could use a ribbon clerk, and I would be glad to recommend you." I could hardly contain my excitement, for I liked the idea that I might earn money of my own. "Oh, yes," I told her. "We want you to be happy here, my girl," Mrs. Hastings continued. "But if anything upsets you, you must let me know." This last was spoken with such gravity that I wondered what she could mean. "What could possibly upset me?" I asked. "You have all been so kind." Mrs. Hastings busied herself at the stove. Just anything at all. Things you might hear or notice." "Well," I said, "there is one thing." She turned and looked at me in alarm. "What?" she asked. "I think there are mice in my closet," I told her. At that, she threw back her head and broke into laughter, looking much relieved. "Is that all? I'll get you a trap and we'll have done with those mice. I'll not have the nasty things chewing on your slippers. The least we can do is keep them down here in the kitchen where they belong." And then she laughed again, most merrily, and I too joined in. That afternoon, I was up to my elbows in flour, for Mrs. Hastings was teaching me to make chicken pie. We had brought up potatoes and onions from the root cellar beneath the kitchen, and now we were working the crust. "Keep a light touch, my girl," she instructed. "But the shortening and flour must be cut together fine, like so." I had just rubbed one arm against my nose when suddenly there was a knock at the back door, and in walked a tall boy with hair as blonde as I ever saw. He had a broad back and carried a large bag of flour over one shoulder. "Hello, Zeke," said Mrs. Hastings. "Put it down, my man, but not on the girl's pie crust." It was too late. Zeke squatted down beside me, and in his haste to get the heavy bag off his shoulder and onto the edge of the table, he misjudged the distance, and the bag rolled over onto my breadboard. "Now there's a clumsy oaf if I ever saw one," Mrs. Hastings cried, but she was chuckling all the while. And when Zeke looked at me with flour on my face, he laughed too, and soon we were all at it. "Zeke Carey is the miller's son, and our delivery boy as well," the cook explained. "If there's anything you need, he can get it for you." "And you must be Judith, all the way from the cold north," Zeke said in amusement. "Well, Ohio's not exactly the Arctic Circle," I said, wanting him to see that I knew my geography at least. "But I'm very glad to be here." "And we are very glad to have you too," he told me. The way he said the word "we" made my cheeks redden, but Mrs. Hastings was smiling, and I half believed that she put him up to it. He grinned as he reached around her and helped himself to a biscuit left over from breakfast. "So what do you do when you're not dusting yourself with flour?" he asked me. "I just got here yesterday," I said. "She'll be busy enough. Don't you go putting ideas in her head," Mrs. Hastings warned him, but Zeke looked straight into my eyes. "When it grows warm, you'll go to the shore with me," he said. "You'll like that, our ocean." He did not ask, he told me, and I could tell by the way Mrs. Hastings had to shoo him out of the kitchen with her apron, as though he were a pestering goose, that here was a young man who was not afraid to speak his mind. In the late afternoon, I did my dusting and was glad enough to do it, for it gave me an excuse to see every room. There was the dining room, with its long table and sideboard, each chair with an acorn carved on its back. The living room, with its stained glass panels above each window, its massive fireplace, the velvet-covered chairs and rose sofa, and the grand piano as black and shiny as coal. With great pleasure, I dusted each key, sounding it softly, and knew that, an undistinguished player that I was, I would play it even so. Then there was my Uncle Jeffrey's study, piled high with books and papers, and the sunroom with the wicker furniture. When I had finished the first floor, I went up to the second, where there were 5 bedrooms and the water closet. Mrs. Hastings and I had the 2 bedrooms at the back of the house, while Uncle Jeffrey had one of the corner bedrooms facing the front. The other belonged to Charles, which was kept for him even though he stayed in town. The 5th bedroom, the smallest, was located just at the top of the stairs, and seemed to be used for storage. There were fishing rods and old lamps, and on the spare bed, a pile of quilts and hat boxes. In each of the bedrooms, save that one and Charles's, I made the beds, plumped the pillows, and dusted the dressers. I was curious about the spare bedroom, however. What intrigued me was that, in addition to the closet, there was still another door. When I opened it, I saw narrow stairs leading upward. "I would not go up there," a voice said. I wheeled about to see Cousin Charles watching me from the hallway. It startled me, for I had not known that he was in the house. "The attic is full of cobwebs and dust. You'll get your dress dirty." He smiled then, and his eyes traveled the length of my dress. I was not planning to go up," I said. "I was checking to see if there was something in need of dusting." "Certainly not up there," he told me, and went down to the kitchen. In the next few days, I discovered that one did not know when Cousin Charles was around and when he was not. I might see him walking briskly down the sidewalk and out the iron gate, hat on head and cane in hand, as though heading for an important engagement. And an hour later, he might be lying on the divan in the sunroom reading the newspaper. Or he would say he was taking a coach into town, and yet not long after, I would hear his footsteps on the stairs. Mrs. Hastings told me he was not at all like my Uncle Jeffrey, who would leave for work at the same time every morning, Sundays excepted, and arrive home for dinner at the same time every evening. For a man who did not live here, Charles was very much in evidence. "What does Charles do?" I asked Mrs. Hastings one afternoon as I helped her peel the onions for stew. "Does he work?" "One is never too sure of Charles," Mrs. Hastings answered. "Now and then he takes employment. I don't know just where." A few days later, she gave me a mousetrap and some cheese. "Set this in your closet, Judith, and in a few nights' time, I imagine you shall have the mice that are pestering you," she said. I thanked her, and the night before I blew out my candle, I put the cheese in the trap and set it on my closet floor. I heard nothing more that night or the night after, but the 3rd night, there came the same scratching sound as before, but louder now, more insistent. A determined clawing as though some small animal would make its way through the wall of my closet, like it or no. Sitting up, I swung my legs over to the side of the bed and lit my candle. There was a light thunk from the closet, and the scratching stopped. I crept to the closet door and opened it slowly. It creaked in need of a good oiling. Slowly, I pushed my clothes to one side so as to see the back of that tiny room, holding the candle out in front of me. There was the mousetrap still set, the cheese untouched. Nothing was nibbled, nothing chewed. The air seemed slightly colder, though, and I wrapped one arm around me, goose pimples rising on my flesh. What caught my eye, however, was my trunk. I took a step forward and held the candle closer. The lid had been closed when I put it away. I was sure of it. But now it had been raised a few inches and rested slightly askew on its frame.